Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, wrote Margaret Wolfe Hungerford, Irish novelist of the late 19th century, in her book Mollyborn. 145 years later, this idiom is one of the most well-known phrases in the English language. Whilst the intentions of this idiom seem to be from a place of kindness, is there utility in this claim, and ultimately, is it true? Our modern culture seems to be modelled around this idiom, perhaps to the point of our own demise. Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm Christine Grace. How are we all doing today? Today is another episode of Debunking the Lunacy. For today's lunacy, we're going to be taking a look at how our culture has become very subjective. Some might say selfish. I would say selfish, with the rise of postmodernism and relativism, particularly with regard to the concept of beauty. The question boils down to this: is beauty objective or subjective? Which, either way answered, opens up more questions upon the nature of reality, such as truth and morality. Beauty is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as a combination of qualities such as shape, colour or form that pleases the aesthetic senses, especially sight. A publication on the nature of beauty made to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy acknowledges the nature of beauty is one of the most enduring and controversial themes in Western philosophy, and is, with the nature of art, one of the two fundamental issues in the history of philosophical aesthetics. For centuries, many great philosophers have dared to tackle this question, and what made my research for this particular episode really fascinating is that the perspectives and interpretations are seemingly endless. But nonetheless, I'm here to present to you my conclusions based upon my findings. The idea for this particular episode came to me upon noticing certain patterns. It's human nature to notice patterns, and I'll be delving into that in this episode too. I noticed so-called beauty standards evaporating before my eyes in the culture around me. I observed people who were clearly not aesthetically beautiful suddenly being praised for their beauty. I noticed people who spoke the truth and also noticed that these trends were not beautiful were demonized for it. I saw the meaning of words change. Suddenly bodies that back in a time of sense connotated obesity, perhaps laziness, lack of self-care, and all-around unhealthiness, now were deemed self-loving, beautiful, and could be found on the front pages of sports magazines. Magazines that typically promoted health and fitness were promoting the opposite, whilst simultaneously claiming that they still held the same integrity. This, for me, shows the lack of utility in claiming that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because it's not really benefiting what's best for people, nor is it kind to feed people's delusion. The second thing I noticed was the overinflation of the female ego. Average-looking, if not below-average-looking women saying that they believe objectively most men would deem them a 10 out of 10 on their appearance. This seemed really strange to me. It's all good and well seeing yourself as a 10. I mean, it clearly shows that you have a high ego, but the delusion to then insist that everyone else probably agrees, that blew my mind a little. Well, what blew my mind wasn't just this, it was how often I saw it. If it was just one or two women, I could understand, okay, a few delusional women here and there, but hey, crazy people exist, right? But to see that it was most women, yeah, that blew my mind. Finally, the pattern I observed was the tendency for women to encourage the overinflated ego amongst other women, even at the detriment of their own health, and just the general lack of regard for the truth. A question I saw thrown around a lot to women was, is Lizzo's appearance beautiful? The majority of women answered yes. When asked if they were told they look like Lizzo, would they receive it as a compliment, it was very clear that they would not. Then, when asked to justify this logic, we would hear the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, she's beautiful in her own way. But if that was the case, and beauty was purely subjective, well, you've already claimed that you, in your subjective opinion, deem Lizzo as beautiful. If you were told you look like her, surely that would mean you are beautiful too, because subjectively, you've already claimed you agree in your subjective opinion that she is beautiful. Now, before any hot air balloons get triggered at me, allow me to clarify. Lizzo is a very successful individual and a talented singer. As a fellow human being, she has innate value, and I'm not claiming that because she's fat, that she has no value as a human being. Her character, of course, is debatable. I'm just acknowledging that she is overweight, and that is not beautiful. I would argue that if she was not famous and people were showed a picture of her, many people would probably agree that she's not beautiful. Or perhaps they would agree out of fear of offending people, which is a common problem today. We need to be able to offend people to communicate properly and to stay true to reality. This episode is surrounded by aesthetic beauty in its original definition, meaning a form that aesthetically pleases the senses, particularly sight. We stick to reality over here. Dictionary definitions: we don't make up our own new meanings for words. No speak your own truth over here. No, we live in the truth. Isn't it crazy that people are so entitled to think that in their tiny lifespan they just have the power to create new meanings of words? Words that have been a part of languages that have held the same meaning for spans of time that are literally completely inconceivable to their tiny minds. But no, Debbie in 2023, who's been on Twitter for 5 minutes, says, hey, do you know what? A man is a woman and a woman is a man. I'll tell you why blurring the lines of definitions is dangerous. It allows for the destruction of language, and we absolutely need language. Trevor English rightly highlights, when a language dies, we lose cultures, entire civilizations, but also we lose people. We lose perspectives, ideas, opinions, but most importantly, we lose a unique way of being human. It's so important that we can all agree on language in order for successful dialogue, in order to understand each other. Language is all we've really got. Language is objective. We all must agree on it for it to have any utility. We can't make up our own subjective meaning for words, otherwise words lose all meaning. We can all agree some words can have two meanings at once. These words are defined by another word, a homonym. For example, the word rock could mean a genre of music or a stone. The word horse could be a rough-sounding voice or horse the animal. Whilst we do live in a world of polarities and binaries, sometimes things can be two things at once. Beauty can be objective and experienced subjectively. Now, you may argue, Christine, this doesn't appear in nature. A zebra cannot be a giraffe and a zebra at once. True, yes. But at the fundamental levels of reality, quantum physics actually tells us that there is a level of duality to the property of how things behave. Waves can behave like particles, and particles can behave like waves. If you get my drift. I don't get my drift either, half the time. Don't worry, I'm just a nerd for a good paradox. And I find physics fascinating. Ignore me, I'm heading off on a tangent, but if you are interested in paradoxes and science, Google wave-particle duality, because it's, in my opinion, very interesting. No one's interested. The point I'm trying to make here is that beauty can be experienced subjectively, but at the same time, in accordance with the definition of beauty, we can all agree on certain objective truths that constitute beauty. A subjective, beautiful experience cannot really be defined by the definition of beauty, when the definition of beauty clearly states that it's something with form, shape, colour that pleases the senses in an aesthetic way through the sense of sight. The subjective experience of beauty is formless. It exists in the metaphysical realm of where we seemingly feel things and conceptualize them in our minds. When looking at the metaphysical realm, we encounter the works of great philosophers such as Aristotle and Plato. Much like Aristotle, German philosopher Immanuel Kant focuses on mental faculties. Both Aristotle and Plato held that things were beautiful if they respected certain mathematical forms, placing beauty in mathematical properties of objects like proportions, perspectives, symmetry, compositional geometry, much like the definition suggests. Beauty relates to elements of the formless, like truth. He says beauty holds its own weight, its own life. Much like great pieces of art, they hold energy, and that energy attracts masses of admirers. Kant does acknowledge that order and harmony are bounded in beauty, and order and harmony exist very much in the worldly plane. As stated in the definition, the level of matter, forms, shapes, colour. Kant does make a great distinction, however, between beauty versus the sublime being that which inspires a sense of awe, wonder, overwhelmingness. This could definitely be seen as a definition that can only be experienced subjectively. It's here we could encounter things outside of form, shape, colour. It's the distinction between Apollonian versus Dionysian, terms used by Friedrich Nietzsche in his work The Birth of Tragedy in 1872. I'm going to delve into this further in the next episode, but for the purpose of today, it's basically thinking versus feeling, order versus chaos, the distinction between visual works of art and, say, music. Beauty, the definition of the word, is very much rooted in order. It's Apollonian, it's visual, it has form, it's something made of matter. So when we talk about beauty, it has to be aesthetically and visually pleasurable, nice to look at. As much as people hate to speak the truth on this, facial expressions tend to give away the truth when you show people a picture of someone beautiful versus someone not beautiful. The debate over where beauty lies continues to this day and has spilled over beyond the realm of philosophy and into fields of cognitive and neurosciences. Neuroscience can now provide sufficient evidence that beauty, as defined in the Oxford Dictionary, is an objective truth. The most convincing piece of evidence that I found was a paper composed by Hassan Alim and others at the Loyola University University of Chicago, titled "Is Beauty in the Eye of the Beholder or an Objective Truth? A Neuroscientific Answer." The literature provides that the objectivist viewpoint of beauty has considerable support from scientific studies across the globe. Research shows that symmetry is highly preferred across cultures, genders, and age groups. Symmetry preference exists across many domains, whether it be in faces, foods, buildings, inanimate objects, or technological interfaces. Therefore, symmetry is one of the most prominent examples of an objectively defined characteristic of beauty. The other features, such as balance, colour, fractality, complexity, and curvature, also point towards the existence of an objective, universal standard for beauty. In biological contexts, symmetry is often a signal of good health, and disruption of symmetry can signal genetic or natural abnormalities. Apart from its importance in the natural world, symmetry is one of the defining principles in art. The reason for such universality can be explained by our shared evolutionary history and consequences because of its similar processing mechanisms in our brain. This can all be read in much greater detail in the paper, so please do go check it out if you are hungry for more. The paper does acknowledge, for every instance of objective standards discussed, there are equally as many subjectivity arguments. However, most of the subjectivity arguments are centered around socio-cultural evidence rather than scientific. I guess it's just different perspectives, but I personally prefer the scientific evidence. The paper provides the following conclusion. Our work supports the process influence in theory and thus the existence of some universal aesthetic variables such as balance, symmetry, and complexity, and therefore a degree of objectivity in beauty. I think it's really important that there's scientific evidence for such claims. Similarly, an article published by Peter H. Miller titled "The Neuroscience of Traditional Architecture" tells us, "Beauty is not subjective. According to my sources, it is a human response within the science of our brains." The article specifically discusses architecture and types of architecture that are more prone to evoke human emotion, traditional versus modern architecture, and why. The author of the article quotes Michael Mahaffey and Nikos Salingaros, telling us, "Biophilia demonstrates the importance of characteristics like plant and animal forms, water, fractal patterns, coherence and legibility, and mathematical complexity. Through eye-tracking devices, we learn that most people look at the same features of a building or street scene, often in the same sequence. In a remarkable verification of traditional insights, we apparently gaze only at regions with contrast, curves, detail, and ornament, or other specific biophilic features. This new science confirms that we see beauty in nature and we often see it in the same way. You would be able to derive that it's objective, it's the same in all of us. When the built environment copies nature's shapes and materials, our brain tells us it's beautiful." Professor Harry Francis Mulgrave concluded, "Beauty is a neurological activity, an urge for and a feeling of pleasure, emanating from the brain's most primal reaches and associated with awe and wonder. In this regard, we judge certain forms to be beautiful because they mirror the basic conditions of organic life," which of course, the basic conditions for life are very much objective fact and not merely a subjective concept. To extend this outside of biological science, we can look at mathematics. Math is a tool that we have discovered to help us better understand the mechanisms of our reality. If we can't all agree that 2 + 2 = 4, well, say goodbye to your comfy little world of TikTok and Amazon deliveries, or just all of life as we know it. Without math, satellites and airplanes would fall out of the sky, nuclear power plants would melt down, the internet would fail, our current forms of communication would disappear, there would be no time, no calendars, no electricity, no bridges, no cars, no buildings because, well, no architecture, no more life-saving surgeries, no MRIs, no X-rays. You get the point, hopefully. Neuroscience tells us we like patterns. Patterns typically found in the perfect design of nature. Math tells us a pattern that we consistently spot in nature is that of the golden ratio, the equation that equals the irrational unending number represented by the Greek symbol of phi. It's about 1.618. This golden ratio manifests in nature on many levels, in many plants, particularly the pattern of seeds in sunflowers, which are perfectly aligned with the golden ratio, and they have adapted in such a way to survive, a sublime example of evolution. More examples can be found of the golden ratio in chameleon tails, seashells, ocean waves, snail shells, whirlpools, the formation of galaxies, hurricanes, spider webs, and so much more. Dr. Marian Zamani, a London-based aesthetic doctor and ocular plastic surgeon, also provides cross-cultural research has illustrated that no matter what the ethnicity or race, our perception of beauty is based upon the proportion of 1.618, the golden ratio. As the face comes closer to this ratio, it becomes perceptibly more beautiful. Our bodies are also in perfect alignment with this ratio. I'm sure you're all familiar with the famous piece of artwork by Leonardo da Vinci, the Vitruvian Man. This piece of artwork would not hold the beauty it objectively holds if Mr. Vitruvian Man was morbidly obese. The beauty is in the ratio of the perfect composition of his healthy human body. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching this episode. This episode took an unbelievable amount of work, and there were so many twists and turns around every corner of my research. As a lover of science and philosophy, attempting to answer this particular question with the seemingly never-ending available answers made available to me, it has definitely turned my brain into scrambled egg. But we made it, we're here. It is my conclusion, beauty is objective. It's derived from our ability to recognize patterns, whether it be for evolutionary purposes or to recognize health for biological purposes. I think, yes, subjectively, we all experience our own interpretation of things. We all have preferences. But as a whole, this is the particular conclusion I have come to. Is beauty objective or subjective? Let me know what your answers are to this question that has pondered in the minds of human beings for centuries. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and share with a friend. For more Debunking the Lunacy episodes, subscribe to my channel. You can do that here. If you have an idea for an episode, leave it in the comments below and I'll try and take a look. I'm intrigued to know what you guys think and why. Tell me your personal experiences, show me evidence that you found, and give me your arguments. And remember, let's stay harmonious in the adversity of opinion.